Hey, WTUFO fans. If you like the show and you want it to continue existing, head to patreon.com/WTUFO and support us for $1 a month. No special stuff, no gatekeeping. Just support the show for $1 a month to help it keep existing. Patreon.com/WTUFO. Thank you very much. What the UFO? I'm here with Dr. Jim Garrison. Jim is the founder, president, and chief academic officer of Ubiquity University and the Washington, D.C. director of the New Paradigm Institute. Hi, Jim. Nice to meet you.
Very good to meet you, Caleb.
Thank you so much for taking some time to talk with us today. Really excited to pick your brain. In case anybody doesn't know, I'd like to give them a quick rundown of your bio, and please feel free to flesh this out if I miss anything. You've got a PhD from Cambridge in philosophical theology, which is very cool and UFO adjacent. And before that, you got an MA in history of religion from Harvard and a BA in history from the University of Santa Clara, sort of backing through your timeline for some reason. You've been a lifelong political activism guy, and also seems you had a serious interest in education, which you maintain by serving as the president of Wisdom University, which then folded into Ubiquity University in 2013. And you were also the co-founder and president of the Gorbachev Foundation from 92 to 95 and the State of the World Forum from 95 to 2004, which was chaired by Mikhail Gorbachev. I thought that was like a fascinating piece of history. And all of this speaks to why you might be interested in the UAP subject, because you seem like a very big picture person. Your career has been global and civilly focused, and it seems like you take a wide lens view of history and our place therein. Does that sound right to you? And is that a good summary of your work so far?
Well, it is true. I'm always fascinated by context, because I believe that context shapes content.
Mhm.
And so the larger the context, the more you can understand the particular components of any given situation or individual or event. So historians call that big history, looking at the largest scope of things and then working toward the center. Sort of like layers of an onion. So I've been fascinated by a variety of related issues all my life. I've been really passionate about education. I was one of those guys that I don't think I ever took a day off from school, maybe once or twice. But I loved school. I loved learning. I loved reading. I did reasonably well. And I've continued that passion to the present day. I just finished Yuval Noah Harari's new book, Nexus.
Oh, cool. I'm excited.
Artificial intelligence. It's very, very good.
Yeah.
So I think you could summarize me as a recovering intellectual.
That's nice. Yeah. Well, I would say you did pretty well. Master's from Harvard, followed by a PhD from Cambridge. That's not bad. It's definitely top quartile stuff. I'm excited about Yuval's new book. He's done a really great job of charting where we came from and looking ahead to what's next.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I'm a big futurism fan, and I think he's sort of unusual in that he's a deep dive historian who has lots of takes about the future.
Yeah.
Do you consider yourself kind of a future focused person as well? Or do you lean more toward history or the present? Or is this a silly question?
No. I think it's actually a profound question. My orientation has been more on the past than the future. That's what historians do. They examine the way human beings have interacted and with each other and with the larger environment over long expanses of time. And that allows them then to better understand the present moment and to predict probabilities moving into the future. So, for example, one of my latest books was called America as Empire.
Mm.
Okay. So I looked at the American empire within the context of the rise and fall of other empires.
Mm.
And I studied William Durant's Story of Civilization and Toynbee's study of history, et cetera, et cetera. And so if you look at what's going on in the United States today, you see all the classic signs of an empire in decline. The United States is in decline at every level,
Yikes.
and as an imperial power.
Mm.
And as if you just think about, just briefly, just to give you a sense of how a historian looks at the present and therefore predicts the future, there are a number of indicators for the decline of an imperial system. One is that they have a concentration of wealth in fewer and fewer hands, and larger and larger numbers of people who are impoverished, indebted, and that gives rise to the second characteristic of an imperium in decline, and that is when the civic virtue that builds the country, that builds the empire, surrenders to personal entitlement, corruption, and a lack of patriotism. What has been called the culture of despair. And then the third characteristic is that empires, for reasons that escape most historians, but it is a function of the declining imperial intelligence, is they get involved in a whole number of senseless wars. Look at Ukraine. Ukraine has turned into a complete debacle. Look at the Middle East. The United States is perpetrating genocide in the Middle East. Look at Asia, where the United States is fomenting war with a prediction on the part of various generals that we're going to have war by 2026 or 2027 with China. At every level, the United States is indicating imperial decline. How much patriotism is left in the United States? How much cynicism? How much manipulation of the media? The growing disparity between the rich and the poor? The collapse of democratic discourse? These are all completely predictable phenomena. And so when one is a historian and one looks at the flow of human beings over time, then one can see that the present is not happening. We always think, because we live our lives uniquely, that what's happening to us is unique, but it isn't. It's happened to people for the last 250,000 years. And it's our lack of awareness of this that is the major cause of our predicament.
There's so much amazing, interesting stuff to talk about just in that I almost want to throw out our UFO interview and do a deep dive. But because our time is limited, I will pivot us toward UAP and new paradigms.
Yeah, with pleasure.
Research around that. I did just want to flag for people a couple of futurism and geopolitics books that I've really enjoyed in the last few years are The Next 100 Years by George Friedman and The End of the World is Just the Beginning by Peter Zeihan. I also hear good things about The Fourth Turning. And I guess quickly, do you have any takes on those guys? Do those books ring any bells for you?
The Fourth Turning is a very interesting book because it asserts that U.S. history is comprised of 80-year cycles.
Mm-hmm.
And
Friedman, to flag this, George Friedman kind of has a similar theory that things happen kind of like generational turnover cycles.
Yeah. So again, the study of history. So if you know where you are in the cycle, you're better able to make judgments to successfully navigate through whatever situations that you're in. And just to segue to the UAP topic, I believe, Caleb, that from a historical point of view, the disclosure of alien civilizations and alien intelligences on planet Earth is the most important milestone in the entire history of the human species. Because up until now, individuals may have seen ETs from time to time, but this is the first time when information about the reality that we are not alone, that extraterrestrial civilizations are here. There's evidence of sustained contact and communication globally. That is going to change every aspect of human history and human society. It's going to change our politics, our religion, our social structures, and our appreciation for what humanity actually is. Up until this point, we've thought of human beings as purely terrestrial phenomena. And now we're broadening our identity to the cosmos, and we're beginning to understand that we're part of not only a web of life on planet Earth, we're part of a web of life that extends throughout the galaxies. And we're one small, infinitesimally minute aspect of a much larger web of life. And that transposition of value and identity is going to enable us in the end to transition from the notion of human supremacy to the notion of sacred reciprocity with all other sentient beings.
What a beautiful turn of phrase, sacred reciprocity.
Yeah.
Living in this new ecosystem we're about to discover. Well, so this is a fascinating lightning bolt that's crashing into these big, slow-moving kind of tectonic shifts in historic cycles. And I guess I want to just ask, how do you feel about that interaction? How do you have this sense that these big sort of like empire scale historic structures that evolve slowly are going to be radically galvanized by this new piece of information? Or do you think it will fold in to the standard way of doing business?
Oh, no. As we integrate into the larger cosmic scheme of things, everything human is going to be enveloped in that. They're too big. They are too powerful. They are too sophisticated to be reduced to the minutiae of human stupidity. If you look around the world today, you don't see very much human intelligence. You see a lot of human stupidity. You know,
it is frustrating.
Why in the face of climate change that is about ready to destroy the foundations of human civilizations, are we not doing anything about climate change? And instead we're going to war with each other.
It's frustrating.
Is it that we have an economic system that we vaunt as the best system in the history of the world, capitalism, which is actually ravishing the planet and communities worldwide and has brought us to the brink of self-destruction? You know, we there's something really wrong with this picture. So what the ETs are, I think the reason why they're here is essentially to warn us and to guide us to come back into a path of alignment. It's worth just noting that, you know, they showed up basically when the United States started to develop the atomic bomb. They were there on July 16th, 1945, when, Robert Oppenheimer oversaw the Trinity test of the first atomic device. And he later said he saw orbs in the sky.
Ooh, I didn't know there was an Oppenheimer sighting.
Yeah. He talked about seeing orbs in the sky. And then 30 days later, there was the first ET. And then in 1947, 2 years later, you had the Roswell crash, all in New Mexico. And then one of the most consistent messages of the non-human intelligences, I prefer to call them extraterrestrials, ETs, that's what people understand, is to warn us that we're about ready to destroy ourselves. warn us that we've got to stop nuclear weapons. I don't know whether you know this or your listeners, but the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, that clock that they've had since I think since the late 1940s actually, is closer to midnight due to the danger of nuclear war now than at any time in the history of the nuclear age.
Mm.
You
There's
know,
probably nothing scarier that we think about less than nuclear war.
Yeah. And that's what they're warning about. Then they've, tampered with nuclear missile silos and nuclear power plants, and
we would recommend the book UFOs and Nukes if people want to double click on that.
Yeah, Robert Hastings. Absolutely. Just
to investigate or poke a little bit at this idea that they're here because of the nukes, how do you square that with the thousands of years of historic sightings going back into antiquity, or estimations that some people have made? I don't know if you would be aware of this, but a physicist, Kevin Knuth, ran some simulations about how long ago civilizations might have gotten here if they were traversing the stars, and he came up with a number like on average 250,000 years ago. So I wonder if you think the increased sightings in the last 100 years, say, are strictly related to the nuclear development of humanity, or if they might have something to do with kind of our increased ability to notice things in the sky by virtue of inventing flying technology ourselves and improving our sensor equipment, / inventing our sensor equipment at all. Do you feel confident that there really has been a significant spike in appearance and behavior in the context of these thousands of years of sightings?
Yeah, I would put it this way. I really admire Professor Knuth, great thinker, and I like his work. I would put it as follows. I think there is no doubt that the contact between extraterrestrials and human beings goes back to the dawn of history. Kevin Knuth is talking about 250,000 years. Well, it was 250,000 years ago that our species, Homo sapiens sapiens, emerged out of Homo sapiens and Homo erectus in a very dramatic short period of time. And when you overlay that with the stories in Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, the indigenous traditions, they all talk about in the primordial past, human beings were shaped, were created by intelligent beings, right? So that is something that we're also going to have to take in. We think that, Roswell, the crash at Roswell was when they showed up. We're waking up to the UFO phenomenon, but only in the West. It's really important. The rest of the world never thought that they weren't here. If you go to Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, the shamanic traditions in Africa and Latin America and Siberia, they're called star people. That they are in regular communication with them. Many of the shamans. It's only in the West, in the Western European, North American Enlightenment, scientific reductionist cultures, that we got to the point where we didn't think they existed, and now we're being confronted with the reality that they are not only here, but as you say, they've been here for some time. And it's probably the case that you and I are hybrids.
That is a stunning idea for humanity to grapple with. And it often makes me think when I encounter this about how long it took us to just get our heads around the idea of evolution. In some places, it's still sort of a hot topic. And it seems like we're likely to enter a multi-decade phase of processing that. I want to just float for you the sort of three chunks of ufology as I see them, and right now and see if this bounces for you in any interesting ways. One is waking people up to the fact that this is an interesting subject at all. Two is investigating what the heck is going on, really like nailing the brass tacks, everything from the physics of the tic tac to the biological history of our species and their maybe multiple species. And then three is just processing this on an emotional, psychological, and cultural level. And I wonder if you have feelings about specifically that third one as we're going through this paradigm shift. I think New Paradigm Institute feels especially well poised to kind of help people make that process, make that processing happen in a healthy way. And so I'm curious about your take on doing that at a cultural level. And I'm also curious about your personal journey into acceptance or deeper forms of discovery along those lines yourself.
Well, I think you're asking the $64,000 question.
Thank you.
Now that they're here, and as Carl Nell says, there's zero doubt. The question that you're posing is the fundamental question. So now what? How is humanity going to orient itself around the extraterrestrial beings that are here on the planet?
Yeah.
Right now, the US government is shooting them down.
Don't love that.
Right now, the United States government is taking a very aggressive national security stance around the whole phenomenon because they want to reverse engineer the ET technology so they can build better bombs, bigger bombs, more lethal weaponry.
And possibly erect some kind of structural defense against a technologically superior civilization.
Yeah, and we believe at the New Paradigm Institute that that's foolhardy. That's insane. Humanity should be opening our hearts to our cosmic neighbors. We should be extending the hand, the open hand, not the fist. You know, what is it about Americans that we seem to be, all we can think about is war and competition? That's not what human beings are about. And, you know, this country's been in perpetual war for nearly 100 years. We're now at war with the non-human intelligences. We're actually shooting them out of the sky, killing the biologics, the alien biologics. That is not what we want to do as we begin our cosmic moment. We agree with John Mack, the psychiatrist at Harvard Medical School, who studied experiencers and people who reported being abducted and so forth. And he said the only way to understand the extraterrestrial, the UFO issue, is with a new paradigm, a paradigm which is large enough to understand that humanity is part of a larger web of life, that humanity is part of something wondrous, and ultimately it's about consciousness. So the New Paradigm Institute is doing a number of things. Number one, we have a training program, and this is actually very exciting. We have a training program between the New Paradigm Institute and Ubiquity University, leading to the first ever graduate degrees, master's and PhD degrees in extraterrestrial studies. And I want to say something about it because this gives you an indication for your listeners. You need to know the history, law, and politics, technology about UFOs, about UAP, as it's now called. What's happened? I mean, everybody should read Richard Dolan's 2-volume UFOs in the National Security State. Everybody should read Robert Hastings' UFOs and the Nukes, as you pointed out earlier. There's a number of really important works of history and so forth that people need to know. You also need, and this is the second certificate that we're starting in January of 2025, on extraterrestrial awareness and communication. We need to be understanding who these beings are, number one. Number two, we need to be learning how to communicate with them. And let me tell you something that's really exciting. Most people know that everyone who's communicated with the extraterrestrials has done so through remote viewing, through mental telepathy. That's how they communicate, is through mental telepathy. You can learn mental telepathy. So in January of next year, we are having a 5-day course with Bertie Jaworski, one of the great remote viewers of our time. She was the one who predicted 9/11 2 years before it even happened and drew the picture of the World Trade Towers and the planes coming in. That's Bertie Jaworski.
Wow.
She's going to be teaching the course. Last week, I met an 8-year-old girl who's been in communication with one of the ET species since shortly after she was born, the blue avians. And she has learned how to speak the language that the blue avians speak. So just think about it. The ETs communicate with humans through mental telepathy, but they talk to each other in their own language. This little girl has learned the language of the blue avians. And so Ubiquity University and New Paradigm Institute, we're going to have a course with her for the first time in human history to teach human beings how to speak ET.
Well, that's fascinating. How did you get connected with this?
As for my sins, as it were, through a series of wondrous synchronicities. But I say this, Caleb, because we want people to be excited. Just imagine a world where millions, billions of humans are speaking with their local ET from other star systems, from other dimensions, from other times, and the human race is starting to interact and learning what I would call the mother tongue.
Which is this consciousness transfer, like
it's
direct
just consciousness transfer with other beings. The mother tongue, you can speak with your dog, your cat, your parrot, trees, birds, fish, anything that's sentient has a capacity to communicate. And we humans need to learn that new language. And so it's a very, very exciting moment in human development. We have that choice. Are we going to orient ourselves negatively and in fear and think about this as a national security issue and we got to kill them before they kill us? That's what we're being told by those guys that are out there saying that this is a national security issue. We at the New Paradigm Institute take a completely different view. Number one, they've been here for some time. If they had wanted to take over the human race, they'd have done it a long time ago. And number two, all the evidence of most of the people around the world over the last 80 years that have had any kind of intelligible communication is that they're warning us that you're about ready to destroy yourselves and you need to lighten up. You need to transform your relations between yourselves and clean up your relationship with the environment. And number three, which is Robert Hastings and the UFOs and the nuclear weapons, they've not only warned, they've gone in and shut down nuclear weapons silos. They've been proactive. So in our view, there may be alien species that have some kind of malign, negative intent. But I think that the overwhelming disposition of those beings who have come to the planet since we ignited the first atomic devices in New Mexico and then in Japan within 30 days of the Trinity test are here for purposes that are constructive. And if we learn how to communicate with them as the people of the world, I think we can shape the future of the world in a much more abundant way. What we have to stop immediately is this exclusive purview of the US and other governments, that they are the only ones that can have this information. And they don't have to tell everybody. They don't have to tell anybody.
Yeah.
Even the president of the United States has been kept out of this loop. That's not right.
I strongly agree.
We're working, that's why we're working for disclosure. And we want as many people as soon as possible to understand that we are at the beginning of a major cosmic moment. We are alive at the most important moment in the history of the world. This is like a Christ event. I mean, just imagine being, in Jerusalem 2,000 years ago with JC Superstar. If you knew that something big was happening, you aren't going to go, sit on the beach. You're going to realize you got to go to the Mount of Olives and hear the Sermon on the Mount, because something big was happening. This is what's happening to us. It's not Trump. It's not Harris. It's not even Ukraine or the Middle East. The ETs are here, folks. And we get to be the first generation in history to consciously, with collaboration worldwide, to enter into this moment and shape the next phase of human evolutionary development as cosmic beings.
It does not get more exciting than that. And I think it makes sense to reach to the dawn of Christianity as a comparison point, because it literally changed the calendar for at least Western historical tradition. And this feels like that kind of thing, that we're approaching this moment after which the world is completely different. And that's why new paradigm makes so much sense as a phrase. I didn't realize that it was a John Mack coinage. Yeah. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Honoring one of the great early thinkers in this field. Man, there are two really interesting directions to go with this. So I'm going to go toward the more cosmic for a moment, and then maybe we can bring it back to Earth with the political disclosure stuff. But you mentioned this malign intent potential from some of these visitors. It does come up in conversations with people who get close to it. And I wonder what your sense is about the sort of geopolitical architecture, to the extent that such a thing might exist, around visiting NHI, non-human intelligence. Has your work given you the impression that there's a broad agreement, or that we're looking at independent actors? And do you imagine that there might be tensions between some of these beings who have some kind of malign intent and beings who are here to guide and improve us?
Well, on that, Caleb, I think we don't know what we don't know.
Yeah.
I think the reality about UFOs and NHI and so forth has been so coercively, comprehensively complete that we're only at the beginning of understanding the full complexity of what it is that we're dealing with.
You're right.
The information that I have so far would be along the following lines. It appears that there are multiple species out there: the short grays, the tall grays, the reptilians, the insectoids, the blue avians, there's probably dozens of different species that in one way or another have manifested themselves. There seems to be a hierarchy between them. The little short grays are the kind of the little minions that run around to do the job, and apparently the reptilians and the insectoids are the farther up the food chain. There also appears to be agreement, some kind of galactic protocol, the prime directive, to go back to Star Trek, that you can't interfere coercively in a planetary civilizational system, like the Cortez did against the Aztecs in 1521, where the Europeans just went in and killed everybody and set up a slave state and extracted the minerals and so forth and so on. Apparently, it's clear they could do that,
Mm-hmm.
but there seems to be a prohibition against doing that. So what that indicates, at least to me, is the fact that if these superior beings have not acted in a coercive or aggressive way, there must be some kind of prime directive that they're following that has to do with the galactic federation, as it were, that is keeping galactic civilizational life in line with certain agreements that preclude them from treating humans like we humans have been treating each other for a very long time.
I take your point that they haven't overtly destroyed us yet, and that is, I think, one of the life rafts of optimism to hold on to. I think the idea that there's a federation is compelling, and certainly as evidence of that, you could point to their relatively shared behavior. Thank you for going a little farther out on a limb there with some of the speculative stuff. I really appreciate it. I'd love to ask about, I guess, some brass tack stuff. This is a little more boring, but I'm curious about your on the ground work right now in increasing the transparency around this subject. We've got this hearing coming up in November. Just to timestamp this again, I know you're making moves to legally defend whistleblowers, to improve the policy around whistleblower protections. So I guess I just would love to ask you a general question about how you feel about the terrestrial work of advancing transparency right now. And specifically, I'm curious, this is maybe a hard question and wave it off if you would like, whether in your legal work at New Paradigm, you have contacted people that you feel confident are actual firsthand witnesses to government programs about UAP.
Well, let me say that the principal reason why I'm in Washington, D.C., as director of the New Paradigm office, is to work on Washington politics, Washington lobbying, to ensure that the disclosure process maintains momentum. I'm very privileged to be working with Daniel Sheehan, who's the president and founder of New Paradigm Institute. He was the general counsel with John Mack back in the 1990s, and that's when they had this vision of a New Paradigm Institute, but they didn't end up establishing it till the fall of 2023, and that's when Danny asked me to go back to Washington and direct the operations here, which I very gladly have done because I deeply respect Dan Sheehan, and it's a privilege to be working with him. We have been developing a whole legal team of 20 plus lawyers and a couple law firms. We worked directly with Tim Burchett's office to develop whistleblower legislation. We've been working directly with the Senate Intelligence Committee last year in getting the UAP Records Collection Act, as it was eventually called, passed. We are supporting Congresswoman Mace and Tim Burchett and others in the hearings that are coming up on November 13th. We're working with MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, in a strategic alliance to have a press event right after the hearing is over on the 13th. We're involved with Senator Gillibrand's office in the hearing that she's going to be conducting in Washington on the Senate side.
Is she planning a public hearing there, or would that be a private Intelligence Committee hearing?
we understand it's public, but the details have not been forthcoming.
That was just personal curiosity there.
Yeah, but anything that we can do in Washington to support the process, New Paradigm Institute wants to be engaged in. And we want to do it in collaboration with other organizations, because we believe that collaborating between our organizations is actually crucial.
I want to highlight that as something you are really good at. I watched your Disclosure Day event, and I thought you personally, Jim, are just an excellent facilitator of connections there. You have connections all over the world about this, and you manage those ceremonies really beautifully. So I wanted to say congratulations and thank you for that.
Thank you. That was, Global Disclosure Day, everybody, was really an incredible event on the 20th of October. The 20th of October is the day when all the government agencies and contracted corporations were supposed to have turned over all the evidence they've gotten since 1945 about UFOs.
Until they kicked the can down the road.
So we want to start a Global Disclosure Day every October 20th, like in the spirit of Earth Day, so that we can start to demarcate one day in the calendar year where humanity celebrates its cosmic moment.
1020 is perfect for that.
Yeah.
Doubling.
Yeah. 1020. Yeah, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. October 20th.
Well, you did a great job, and I would strongly recommend that everybody watch that several-hour series, because you connected people from all over the world who are doing their own work, and I think you can see in that the way that they respect you and look to you as a leadership figure in this. You really are at the tip of the spear here in a really important moment, and there are other organizations that are doing cool collective work, but as you say, bringing them together is a kind of missing piece that multiplies the force of all of them.
Yeah, and I think the collaboration that we're experiencing with a lot of people out there, this is a collective tip of the spear, and that's what makes it so exciting. And that was what was beautiful about the Global Disclosure Day. There are people working on this issue all over in unbelievably creative ways. It's quite extraordinary, actually. Quite extraordinary.
I agree. I loved watching some of the viewership parties. And Bertie Jaworski made an appearance. Is that right?
Yeah.
I'd like to reach out to her.
She's the one that's doing our course on remote viewing in January.
That's so cool.
That woman is a force of nature. Anybody that's within 100 miles of Albuquerque, New Mexico, you got to join the UFO group. Bertie Jaworski's built the most dynamic, well-attended UFO meetings in the world, not just in the United States. She has hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people that come to her meetings, on Saturday nights to talk about the UFOs. She's an extraordinary force of nature, and we're very privileged to be working with her.
That's really cool. Well, before I leave the terrestrial work, I just want to double click one more time on this whistleblower question. Is New Paradigm in communication with any whistleblowers who haven't hit the public sphere yet?
Yes. And that's Danny Sheehan in our California office.
Okay, we'll leave it at that then, and we'll chase that rabbit hole another time. I am curious, as our time runs short, about your vision for the post-disclosure world. I'm interested in what kind of structures you think we need culturally, diplomatically, politically, maybe even militarily, to encounter this new reality. And I'm also curious what you would like to say to visitors in a public disclosure event. If you imagine that we could communicate, if you imagine we could have a public forum of some kind, how would you want that to go, and what would you like to say?
Well, I think for me, Caleb, the future rests with the people of planet Earth taking the accountability to become aware of and to learn to communicate with these advanced beings. trying to change the US government, trying to change the Russian government or the Chinese government or capitalism and all these other things, in my view, is secondary to teaching people everywhere what the history, the law, the politics of this phenomenon is, and then how to become aware of these extraterrestrial beings and to learn how to communicate with them. If we had, within 10 or 20 years, billions of people communicating with the extraterrestrials in an open-hearted way, my belief is that the structures, the human structures, would be naturally transformed. Because the consciousness that produced the problem can't solve the problem. So the key ingredient of the disclosure movement is to change consciousness. And I'm watching it by when people start to learn remote viewing so they can communicate with ETs, much less when they start to learn how to communicate in the specific languages of the ETs. It catalyzes the very change of consciousness that is necessary to change the other human institutions. So let me give you an image. Right now, most of us think that there's 7 chakras, from our root chakra up to our crown chakra. But there's an 8th chakra, about 8 to 12 inches above the top of our head. And that 8th chakra is like an antenna. When you learn the mother tongue, when you learn how to communicate intelligibly with ETs, you're activating your 8th chakra. That's the change of consciousness that we all need. Because once you go to that level and your frequency is refined to that level, then you look at how we're treating each other and treating the planet, and you say, we can't do this anymore. So the consciousness is what we're trying to induce the transformation of. Now, coming to your question, so if there was let's say a big auditorium, being live streamed around the world and the ET showed up, what would you say? I would just say what any sentient being should say to any other sentient being upon meeting for the first time. I come with an open heart. I'm curious about who you are. I want to understand your history and your values so that we can work together to build a cosmos that's worthy of all of us. I would approach them with a completely open hand, open heart. My experience, and I think the message of all the great spiritual and religious traditions, is that love is not only the most powerful kind of gravitational force in the world, uniting everything that is into a singularity, oriented around beauty, but the disposition of love in one's heart is what gives one the strength, the courage, the fortitude of absorbing whatever experience is going to come in a transformationally beneficial and redemptive way. So for me, all of us need to approach this moment with our hands extended in friendship and a handshake or a hug, and with a disposition of heart, of compassion, curiosity, mutuality, and co-creativity, because that's how the future will be built.
That's beautiful. Thank you very much. And thank you for approaching us with an open heart today. I certainly hope to receive your wisdom in a similar fashion. And I hope people listening think creatively about how to raise their own vibrations up toward that 8th chakra and maybe beyond. Who knows what's going on up there? And so I'd just love to ask as an outro, how you think people can help, where they should reach out to you online, where they should follow.
Yeah, go to the
your work.
newparadigminstitute.org or go to ubiquityuniversity.org and look up the ET Studies program. It's a very exciting training for the future that is now upon us. If you go to the New Paradigm Institute homepage, there's all kinds of calls to action. We want people to be committing to making UAP disclosure an election issue, a political issue. Contact your congressional representative, your senator, the new president, supporting whistleblower legislation, supporting the next version of the UAP Disclosure Act. There's many ways to get involved. We have Citizens for Disclosure, so you can go to the New Paradigm .org website and sign up for being a Citizens for Disclosure. We've got groups in all 50 states and probably a dozen countries around the world. It's the first time ever that an organization has galvanized citizen activism around the world about disclosure. So there's all kinds of ways to get involved, all kinds of ways. Go on Netflix, start looking at all the ET stuff on Netflix. I mean, educate yourself. That's one of the most fundamental. Educate yourself, learn ET, get involved.
Yeah, start taking that Blue Avian 101 as soon as possible. All right. Well, thank you so much again for your time
Thank you,
today.
Caleb.
And I really appreciated it, and it was great to meet you. Hope you have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. And that's the show. Thank you for watching or listening. Support us for $1 a month at patreon.com/WTUFO, patreon.com/WTUFO. Support us for $1 a month. Thank you very much.